Vivian Calloway walked into Hartwell Medical Center believing the appointment would take 40 minutes. A routine prenatal check at 32 weeks, a blood pressure reading, maybe a growth scan, then back to the quiet of her rental apartment on the east side of Chicago, where nobody knew her last name and nobody needed to. She carried a canvas tote bag with her insurance card, her water bottle, and a folder of ultrasound images she had started keeping in order, the way her mother once kept recipes, carefully, as if the paper itself mattered. The Hartwell was not a modest hospital. It sat on Michigan Avenue like a declaration, all glass and pale stone, with valet parking for the upper floors and a separate entrance for what the brochure called Premier Patient Services. Vivian had been referred here by her OB after a minor complication at week 28. She did not choose the Hartwell for its reputation. She did not choose it for the marble floors or the fresh orchids in the lobby or the way the receptionists wore navy blazers instead of scrubs. She came because her doctor said the maternal-fetal specialist here was the best in Illinois, and Vivian had decided months ago that whatever else she was willing to sacrifice, her child's safety was not on the list. She checked in at the third-floor desk without trouble. The nurse who scanned her ID smiled genuinely and told her the wait would be about 20 minutes. Vivian sat in a chair near the window and looked out at the lake, gray and enormous in the November light, and pressed one hand against the side of her stomach where the baby had been pushing since morning, insistent and alive. She did not see Courtney Baxter until Courtney was already standing in front of her. Courtney was the kind of woman who arrived in rooms the way weather systems did, all in tension and atmosphere. She wore a camel coat that cost more than Vivian's monthly rent, and her hair was the specific shade of blonde that required monthly maintenance in places that did not post their prices. She was Vivian knew, the woman her husband Marcus had been seeing for the better part of a year. She knew because Marcus had told her himself, 3 months ago, with the particular cruelty of a man who had confused confession with courage. "I wasn't sure it was you," Courtney said, though her expression made it clear she had been completely sure. "You look exhausted." Vivian looked up from the window slowly. "Courtney, I have an appointment on this floor," Courtney said, as if Vivian had questioned her right to be there. "Dermatology consult. They keep it on the 3rd floor here. Very discreet." She smiled. "Unlike some situations." Vivian said nothing. She had learned, in the months since Marcus's confession, that silence was the only language Courtney could not weaponize because it gave her nothing to reshape. But Courtney had not come to be ignored. She stepped closer, lowering her voice in the way people do when they want to be overheard selectively. "How far along are you now?" 8 months. "You're carrying it very low. My friend's doctor said that usually means a difficult delivery." "I'm going to ask you to step back," Vivian said quietly. Courtney tilted her head. "I'm just making conversation. We're adults, Vivian. Marcus and I have been adult about this. I'd think you could manage the same." She paused. "Especially now, given everything." "Given everything," Vivian repeated. "The separation. The prenup. The fact that Marcus's family is not going to allow this pregnancy to complicate the asset division." Courtney said it the way someone reads a grocery list. "His mother made that very clear to their attorney last week. I thought you should know, as a courtesy." The waiting room had gone quiet in the particular way that public spaces do when strangers collectively decide to pretend they are not listening. A woman across the room shifted in her seat. A man near the elevator found something urgent on his phone. The navy blazer receptionist kept her eyes on her screen but had not typed anything in over a minute. Vivian stood up. At 32 weeks, standing up was not a small gesture. It took effort and intention and the kind of physical commitment that made it impossible to ignore. She was not tall, but standing, she occupied space differently than Courtney expected. "You came here to tell me that," Vivian said. "Not a question." Courtney's smile flickered. "I came here for a dermatology appointment." "Then go to it." Something shifted in Courtney's expression, a tightening around the eyes, the specific look of a woman who had planned for resistance, but not for composure. She reached out and knocked Vivian's canvas tote from the chair beside her. The folder of ultrasound images hit the floor. Paper slid across the pale tile, the careful record of 32 weeks scattered between chair legs and strangers' shoes. The room held its breath. Vivian looked at the images on the floor. She looked at Courtney. She did not bend down.
"Pick those up," she said.
Courtney laughed, short and sharp. "Excuse me? Those are medical records. Pick them up." "I didn't put them there on purpose. It was in—" "You put them there on purpose," Vivian said, still without raising her voice. "Everyone in this room knows you put them there on purpose. Pick them up." Courtney looked around the room, recalculating. Then she stepped forward and placed the heel of her boot on the edge of the nearest ultrasound image. "Before you pick those up," she said softly, "you should think very carefully about what you're doing. You're about to become a single mother with no income, no family money, and a child Marcus's family intends to contest custody of the moment it's born. You don't have a position here, Vivian. You don't have leverage. What you have is a waiting room and a folder on the floor." She pressed her heel slightly. "So perhaps a little humility is in order." The automatic doors at the end of the corridor opened. Marcus Calloway walked through them looking the way he always looked in a crisis, controlled, expensive, and slightly too late. He stopped when he saw both women. His eyes moved from Courtney to Vivian to the papers on the floor and back to Vivian. Then he said the 4 words that told Vivian everything she needed to know about who he still was. "What did you do?" Vivian felt something close inside her.
"Not break. Close."
The way a door closes when a house is finally empty. She looked at her husband, then at Courtney, then at the ultrasound image still pinned under Courtney's heel, and she said, "I want the security footage from this floor preserved.
Right now.
Before anyone in this building makes a single decision about what happened here." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And then Vivian's phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. She already knew who it was. She had been avoiding his calls since morning. She looked at the screen and saw one word.
"Dad."
She let it ring. Marcus crossed the waiting room with the practiced calm of a man who had spent 15 years turning uncomfortable moments into manageable ones. He was good at it. Vivian had once admired that quality, back when she believed composure was the same thing as character. Now she recognized it for what it was, a technique, something learned in boardrooms and country clubs and the long dining table of the Calloway family home in Winnetka, where feelings were acknowledged only when they could be useful. "Vivian," he said, lowering his voice to the register he used when he wanted to sound reasonable without being asked to be. "Let's find somewhere private. I'd like the footage preserved first," she said, not to Marcus, but to the receptionist behind the navy blazer. The young woman looked up, then looked at Marcus, then back at Vivian. She did not move. Courtney picked up her coat from the chair beside her and smoothed it with both hands. "This is exactly what I was talking about," she said to Marcus, as though Vivian were a weather event they were both observing from a safe distance. "She's been like this since I got here." "Like what?" Vivian said. Courtney met her eyes. "Unstable." The word landed in the room, like something dropped from a height. Vivian watched it land, and did not flinch. She had been called difficult before. Emotional. Sensitive. Proud. Each word had been handed to her by someone who needed her smaller, and each time she had accepted it the way you accept a coat that doesn't fit because the room is cold and you don't want to cause a scene. She was not accepting anything today. "I am 32 weeks pregnant," Vivian said, loudly enough for the room to hear without performing loudness. "I came to this hospital for a prenatal appointment. A woman I did not invite here entered this waiting room, made threats about my child's custody, and deliberately knocked my medical records onto the floor. That is what happened. That is the only version of what happened." A nurse at the far end of the corridor had stopped walking. An older patient near the elevator was watching with open attention. The receptionist's hand hovered over her keyboard without pressing anything. Marcus turned slightly toward Courtney. Something passed between them that Vivian was not meant to see, but she saw it. A flicker of coordination, the invisible signal of 2 people who had rehearsed a situation they expected to control. "Vivian," Marcus said, turning back. "Courtney told me she ran into you. I came because I was concerned. That's all this is." "She told you she ran into me," Vivian repeated. "Yes." "While you were where exactly?" A pause. Small, but visible. "I had a coffee downstairs. In this building. There's a cafe on the ground floor." Vivian nodded slowly. the Hartwell Medical Center on Michigan Avenue, where Marcus happened to be having coffee on the same morning Courtney happened to have a dermatology appointment on the same floor as Vivian's prenatal specialist. She filed the coincidence away the way she had been filing things away for months, carefully in order. A door opened at the end of the corridor, and a man in a white coat came through it. Dr. Philip Osei, the maternal-fetal specialist, late 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where people were frightened. He looked at the papers still on the floor, at Vivian standing with one hand on her stomach, at Marcus and Courtney, at the silent waiting room, and understood something without being told what it was. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "let's get you into the exam room. I'd like to stay here until someone confirms the security footage from this floor is being preserved," Vivian said. Dr. Osei looked at the receptionist. Amanda. Amanda reached for her phone. Courtney exhaled impatiently. "This is a medical facility, not a courtroom. She can't just demand. She can request," Dr. Osei said, without looking at Courtney. "And she has. Amanda, please call down to facilities and ask them to flag the third-floor corridor footage from the last 30 minutes as preserved, pending review." Amanda nodded and dialed. Marcus stepped closer to Vivian, close enough to lower his voice to something that felt intimate but was actually strategic. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. For yourself. For the baby. My mother is already—" "I don't care what your mother is," Vivian said. The sentence stopped him. She had never said anything like it to him before. For 3 years of marriage, she had navigated Eleanor Calloway with patience and diplomacy and the exhausting grace of a woman who understood that her husband's loyalty had a hierarchy and she was not at the top of it. She had attended the dinners, absorbed the comments, smiled through the holidays, and told herself it was manageable. It was not manageable. It had never been manageable. She had simply been managing herself. "Vivian. Marcus, you walked into this room and asked what I did. Your girlfriend's heel is on my daughter's ultrasound, and the first sentence out of your mouth was, 'What did you do?'" She held his gaze. "That told me everything I still needed to know." Courtney, who had drifted slightly toward the elevator, turned back at the word girlfriend with the specific expression of a woman who had been promised a different title. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "That's not fair." "No," Vivian agreed. "It isn't." Dr. Osei bent down quietly and collected the ultrasound images from the floor. He straightened them without comment, placed them in their folder, and handed them to Vivian with both hands, the way you return something sacred. She took them. Her eyes burned for a moment, but she did not let them spill. A hospital administrator appeared at the end of the corridor. Young, sharp-suited, with the expression of someone who had been called from a meeting they considered more important than this. His name tag read Director of Patient Services, Graham Holt. He walked toward the group with the energy of someone arriving to contain, not to resolve. "Mrs. Calloway, I understand there's been an incident. We'd like to move this conversation to our family consultation suite. It's much more comfortable and I'd like the name of every staff member present in this corridor for the last hour," Vivian said. Graham Holt smiled the way institutions smile when they are nervous. "I don't think that's necessary at this stage." "At this stage," Vivian said, "a pregnant patient was threatened and had her medical records thrown on the floor in front of your staff, while your receptionist looked at a man for permission to help. I think staff documentation is very necessary." Graham looked at Marcus with the faint recognition of someone who knows a name from a donor list. "Mr. Calloway, perhaps if you and your wife—" "We're separated," Vivian said. Graham recalibrated. "Of course. Mrs. Calloway, we want to ensure your comfort and the well-being of—" "Then preserve the footage, document the staff present, and give me a formal incident form."
She paused.
"Or document that I asked and you declined. Either way, something gets written down today." Graham Holt's smile thinned. Marcus looked at Vivian as though he were seeing a different woman standing in his wife's body. He had mistaken her quietness for accommodation for so long that her stillness now confused him. He kept waiting for her to cry, or to soften, or to pull him aside and whisper that she just wanted things to be okay. She had done that before. Many times. She realized, the thing he had most depended on. She was not going to do it today. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She felt it but did not look at it. She already knew. Her father had called 4 times since 8 that morning, and she had declined each one, not because she didn't want to hear his voice, but because she had promised herself that whatever happened today, she would handle the first part alone. She needed to know she could. Courtney, standing near the elevator with her composure slightly fraying at the edges, said, "I think we should all remember that she walked in here already agitated. Ask anyone in this room." Dr. Osei looked up from his clipboard. "I'd be careful," he said quietly, "about asking anyone in this room." Courtney blinked. Graham Holt looked between the doctor and the administrator with the expression of a man realizing the ground had shifted without anyone announcing it. Vivian reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a pen. She walked to the reception desk, picked up the blank incident form Amanda had placed there without being asked, and began writing in clear, unhurried letters. Her name,
The time.
the sequence of events, the words spoken, the image on the floor, the heel, the thread about custody, the word unstable, deployed like a weapon in a waiting room full of witnesses. Marcus watched her write. Something moved across his face that she could not name and did not try to. When she finished, she signed it with her full name, Vivian Grace Calloway. Then she looked at the pen for a moment and added, beneath it, in smaller letters, the name she had quietly carried for 3 years without using. Vivian Grace Whitmore Calloway. Graham Holt read it from across the desk. His expression did not change, but his stillness did, the way stillness changes when it becomes something other than calm. Marcus did not see it, but Courtney did. And Courtney, who prided herself on knowing which names mattered in which rooms, felt something shift under her feet that had nothing to do with the marble floor. Vivian capped the pen, handed the form back to Amanda, and turned toward the exam room. She had taken 3 steps when the elevator at the end of the corridor opened. She did not turn around. She heard the doors, heard footsteps, heard the quality of silence that a room produces when someone unexpected enters it. Then she heard Graham Holt say, in a voice stripped of all its professional texture, "Mr. Whitmore, we weren't notified of a visit." Vivian closed her eyes for one breath. Then she kept walking. There was still an appointment to keep. She made it to the exam room before the corridor behind her fully understood what had arrived. Dr. Osei closed the door with the quiet authority of a man who had spent a career protecting small rooms from large intrusions. He helped Vivian onto the exam table without making the help feel like pity, adjusted the pillow behind her back, and checked her blood pressure with the focused attention of someone who genuinely wanted the number to be good. It was not good. 140/90, he said, without alarm in his voice, which was itself a kind of alarm. "I want you to breathe slowly for a few minutes before we do anything else." Vivian looked at the ceiling. It was white and unoffensive, the way hospital ceilings always were, designed to give frightened people something neutral to rest their eyes on. She breathed. The baby moved, a slow roll to the left, as if settling in. "She's been active all morning," Vivian said. "That's good," Dr. Osei said. "That's her telling you she's paying attention." "She gets that from her grandfather," Vivian said, almost to herself. A knock at the door. Not Graham Holt's knock, which would have been official and slightly too loud. This was different. 2 measured taps. Patient. Certain. Dr. Osei looked at Vivian. She nodded once. The door opened and Robert Whitmore stepped inside. He was 63 years old and looked like a man who had decided at some point in his 50s that he was done pretending to be less than he was. He was tall, gray at the temples, dressed in a charcoal suit without a tie, which on him read not as casual, but as considered. He had driven himself. He always drove himself when it mattered, because it was the only way to arrive somewhere without an audience preceding him. He looked at his daughter on the exam table, at the pillow behind her back, at the blood pressure cuff still on her arm, and something passed through his face that he did not attempt to hide. He did not rush to her. He stopped just inside the door and said, "Are you all right?" Not a question with a rising inflection. A question asked by someone who needed the truth more than reassurance. "My blood pressure is high," Vivian said. "The baby is fine." Robert nodded. He looked at Dr. Osei. Philip. Robert. The two men knew each other. Vivian registered this, without surprise. Her father knew most people in most rooms. It was not something he cultivated for advantage. It was simply what happened when you spent 40 years building things and paying attention to who built them with you. Tell me what you need, Robert said to the doctor. Right now I need her blood pressure down and her stress level lower, Dr. Osei said. Everything else waits. Robert pulled a chair to the side of the exam table, sat down, and said nothing. He did not offer solutions. He did not take out his phone. He did not begin making calls or issuing instructions or doing any of the things Vivian had always feared he would do if she ever let him into a moment like this one. He simply sat beside her the way he had sat beside her mother in the last months of her illness, steady and present, and willing to be useless if useless was what was needed. Vivian felt her shoulders drop half an inch. How did you know I was here? She said. You declined 4 calls, he said. You only decline when something is happening and you're deciding whether you need me. I didn't need you. I know. He looked at her hands folded over her stomach. I came anyway. I'll apologize for it later if you want me to. She almost smiled. You never apologize for anything. I'm learning, he said. Outside the exam room, the corridor had reorganized itself around the presence of Robert Whitmore the way spaces do when someone arrives who changes the mathematics of a situation. Graham Holt was on his phone with his back to the waiting room. Marcus stood near the window with his arms crossed, a posture Vivian recognized as his defensive default, the body language of a man who felt entitled to be somewhere and was beginning to doubt it. Courtney sat in a chair with her coat buttoned to the collar, her earlier confidence compressed into a smaller and more brittle version of itself. The Whitmore name had done what it always did. Not announced itself. Simply arrived. Marcus had known, in the abstract, that Vivian's father was wealthy. She had told him early in their relationship, carefully and without embellishment, that her family had money. Marcus had heard this and filed it in the category of things that were comfortable but not significant, because the Callaways had money too, and he had assumed, the way men of his background often assumed, that all money existed in roughly the same neighborhood. He understood now, watching Graham Holt's face on the phone, watching the receptionist type with sudden urgency, watching the director of patient services transform in real time from a man managing an inconvenience into a man managing a liability, that he had been wrong about the neighborhood. Robert Whitmore had founded Whitmore Capital Partners at 31. He had spent 3 decades in private equity, infrastructure investment, and healthcare development. He sat on the boards of 4 hospital systems. He had, 6 weeks ago, and without mentioning it to Vivian, finalized the acquisition of a 40% stake in Hartwell Medical Group, the parent company of Hartwell Medical Center on Michigan Avenue, as part of a broader consolidation in the Midwest healthcare market. He had not told Vivian because she had asked him, when she moved to Chicago, to let her build her own life, without the weight of his portfolio following her into every room. He had respected that. He was still respecting it. But he had also, quietly and without drama, made sure that the hospital where his daughter's OB had referred her was one where, if something went wrong, he would have a direct line to the people responsible. He had not expected to need that line today. But he was his father's son, and his father had taught him that preparation was not pessimism, it was precision. In the exam room, Dr. Osei completed the growth scan with careful commentary. The baby was positioned well. The placenta looked healthy. The growth measurements were exactly where they should be at 32 weeks. She's going to be stubborn, Dr. Osei said, pointing to something on the screen. Everyone keeps saying that like it's a warning, Vivian said. With your family, Robert said, looking at the screen with undisguised wonder. It's a survival skill. For a moment the room held only the sound of the baby's heartbeat on the monitor, fast and steady and indifferent to everything happening outside the door. Then Robert looked at his daughter. Tell me what happened. All of it. She told him. She told it the way she had written the incident report, in order, without dramatizing, without softening. She told him about Courtney's arrival, the comments about custody, the tote bag knocked from the chair, the ultrasound on the floor, the heel, the word unstable, Marcus's first sentence when he walked in. She told him about Graham Holt and the consultation suite and the form she had written herself. She told him about signing her full name at the bottom. Robert listened without interrupting. His face did not perform anger. It settled into something quieter and more permanent than anger. The expression of a man filing information in a place where it would not be forgotten. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You handled it correctly," he said. "I know," she said. "I needed to hear it anyway." He nodded. Then he stood and adjusted his jacket and said to Dr. Osei, "I need to make 2 calls. I'll be in the corridor." 5 minutes. Dr. Osei said, "Her pressure needs to stay down." 5 minutes, Robert said again and walked out. What happened in the corridor in those 5 minutes was not a confrontation. Robert Whitmore did not raise his voice. He did not threaten Marcus or humiliate Courtney or dress down Graham Holt in front of the waiting room. He made 1 call to the Hartwell Medical Group's chief legal officer and 1 call to his own attorney. He spoke in the tone of a man confirming arrangements already in motion, which was the most frightening tone available to someone with his resources, because it meant the arrangements had begun before the conversation. Graham Holt received a message on his phone while Robert was still on his first call. He read it twice. Then he walked to the reception desk and quietly instructed Amanda to pull the full footage archive from the 3rd floor for the past 2 hours and flag it for legal hold. Marcus watched Graham's face and understood something had changed. "What's happening?" he said. Graham looked at him with the expression of a man who has just recalculated whose name matters more in this building. "Mr. Calloway, I need to ask you and he paused, searching for a word, "your guest to remain available for a few minutes." "Available," Marcus repeated. "We may need a brief statement from both of you regarding the incident this morning." Courtney stood up. "I'm not giving any statement. Nothing happened." "She's exaggerating." Robert ended his call and turned to look at Courtney for the first time since entering the corridor. He did not say anything immediately. He simply looked at her the way a person looks at something they are deciding how much attention it deserves. Then he said, very quietly, "My daughter's medical records were on the floor." Courtney opened her mouth. "Don't," Marcus said. First useful thing he had said all morning. Robert looked at his son-in-law for a long moment. The look was not hatred. It was something more unsettling than hatred. It was assessment. The kind that had nothing personal in it, which made it feel more personal than anything else. "Marcus," Robert said. "Robert." "I'm not going to do what you think I'm going to do," Robert said. "I'm not going to make this ugly. Vivian wouldn't want that, and frankly neither would I." He paused. "But I need you to understand something clearly. Whatever you thought this situation was before today, it is now something different. And the difference is not me. The difference is that your wife wrote her full name on a form in this building, and now everyone in this building knows what that name is." Marcus stared at him. Robert turned back toward the exam room door. "She'll be in with Dr. Osei for another 30 minutes. I'd suggest you use that time to speak with your attorney." He went back inside. In the exam room, Vivian was looking at the image the sonographer had printed from the scan. Her daughter's profile, clear and calm against the dark background, one hand raised near her face. "She's waving," Vivian said. "She's covering her eyes," Dr. Osei said. "Smart girl." Vivian laughed. It was the first time she had laughed since morning, and it surprised her with its completeness. Robert sat back down beside her. He looked at the image. He was quiet for a moment that stretched in the good direction. "I want to tell you something," he said. Vivian looked at him. "When your mother was pregnant with you, she refused to let me come to the first 3 appointments. Said she wanted to meet you on her own terms before I made you part of everything else." He looked at the printed image. "I was furious. I thought she was shutting me out." He paused. "She was right. Some things need to be met alone first." Vivian looked at her father. At the careful way he held his hands. At the cost of what he had just said. "She would have handled today better than I did," Vivian said. "She would have handled it exactly the way you did," Robert said. "That's not a coincidence." Outside, the corridor had gone very quiet. The quiet of a place recalibrating. Of people who had spent the morning certain of something now less certain. Of a building beginning to understand that the woman in exam room 3 was not who they had decided she was when she walked in carrying a canvas tote and a folder of careful, ordered images. And in that quiet, Marcus Calloway sat in a waiting room chair, holding his phone without looking at it, and began, slowly and too late, to understand the difference between a woman who had nothing and a woman who had simply chosen to carry her own things. The afternoon light through the third-floor windows had shifted from gray to something almost gold by the time Vivian walked out of the exam room. November in Chicago did that occasionally, offered one clean hour of good light between the cold and the dark, as if the city was capable of apology. She walked slowly, one hand resting at her side, the printed sonogram image tucked inside the folder she had retrieved from the floor and reorganized with the same quiet care she gave everything she had decided to keep. Dr. Osei walked beside her. Robert followed half a step behind, close enough to be present, far enough to let her arrive on her own terms. The corridor was different now. Graham Holt stood near the reception desk with a woman Vivian did not recognize, older, silver-haired, in a dark blazer with the Hartwell Medical Group logo on the lapel. She would learn later that this was Patricia Norris, the system's chief patient safety officer, who had driven from the corporate office on Wacker Drive after receiving a call that the words incident, footage, and Whitmore had appeared in the same sentence in the same morning. Patricia was the kind of person institutions keep for exactly this type of situation, not to fix what happened, but to ensure that what happened was properly categorized before it became something else. Amanda, the receptionist, was no longer pretending to type. Marcus was still in the waiting room. He had not left. Vivian had not expected him to leave. Leaving would have required a decision, and Marcus had always struggled with decisions that did not have a clear personal advantage attached to them. He stood when he saw her come out of the exam room, the instinctive manners of his upbringing surfacing even now, and then seemed unsure what to do with the standing. Courtney was not in the waiting room. Vivian noticed this and did not ask about it. She would find out later that Courtney had gone downstairs at some point during the 30 minutes and not come back up. No departure announcement. No confrontation. She had simply subtracted herself from the situation the way people do when they realize the situation has become one they can no longer narrate to their advantage. Patricia Norris stepped forward. Mrs. Calloway, I'm Patricia Norris. I want to personally. I know what you want to personally do, Vivian said, not unkindly. I'd like to hear it after you tell me whether the footage has been secured. Patricia glanced at Graham, who nodded.
Full archive.
Legal hold was placed at 11:47. And my incident report. Filed, timestamped, and copied to our patient advocacy office and our legal department. Vivian looked at her steadily. Was it copied anywhere else? A pause. Not yet. I'd like it copied to my attorney this afternoon. I'll provide the address. Patricia nodded with the expression of a woman who had expected this and prepared for it, and still found the reality of it slightly more direct than the preparation. Of course. Robert said nothing. He had said very little since returning to the exam room. This was, Vivian understood, one of the most deliberate things about him. He had spent the morning making 2 phone calls and then returning to his daughter's side, and those 2 phone calls had rearranged the architecture of the situation more thoroughly than anything louder could have. The Whitmore name had not needed to perform. It had simply needed to be known. Marcus crossed the waiting room toward her. He stopped at a respectful distance, which told her that somewhere in the last 30 minutes he had received counsel, either from an attorney or from the part of himself that was occasionally capable of reading a room correctly.
Can I talk to you? He said.
Vivian looked at him. Marcus Calloway was not a bad man in the way that some men were bad, deliberately, with full knowledge of the harm they were choosing. He was bad in the more common, and in some ways more damaging way, the way of men who were never required to be more than convenient, who had been handed so many softened versions of consequences that they had genuinely lost the ability to feel the weight of what they did until someone held it up in front of them in a place they could not leave. She had loved him. She wanted to be honest with herself about that, because erasing it would have been its own kind of lie. She had loved the person she believed he was becoming. She had been wrong about the trajectory, not the feeling.
You can talk, she said.
I'll listen to what's actually true. He nodded. They moved to the window at the end of the corridor, away from Patricia and Graham and Amanda and Robert, who stayed near the desk with the particular stillness of a man who had learned, belatedly and with effort, where the edges of his role were. Marcus looked out at the lake. I didn't know she was going to come here, he said. But you knew she knew I had an appointment today. He was quiet for a moment. That moment was its own answer. Your mother told her, Vivian said. It was not a question. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. I think so. Eleanor called Courtney and told her where I'd be and when. Vivian said it plainly, not to wound him, but because plainness was the only thing she trusted anymore. And you had coffee downstairs. I didn't know what she was going to do. I thought he stopped. I don't know what I thought. You thought she'd discourage me, Vivian said. From the incident report. From the documentation. From making anything formal. You thought she'd come up here and say the right combination of things, and I decided it was easier to be quiet. Marcus looked at her with an expression that was not denial. That was something. Not enough, but something. I've been quiet for a long time, Marcus, she said. I was quiet when your mother told me at Christmas that I wasn't the right fit for the family. I was quiet when you missed the 12-week appointment because of a work dinner that wasn't a work dinner. I was quiet when Courtney started calling your personal number and you told me it was nothing, and I chose to believe you because believing you was easier than knowing. She looked at him steadily. I have been so quiet. He did not offer a defense. She gave him credit for that. She's healthy, Vivian said, touching the folder against her side. The baby. Everything looks good. I thought you should know, since you're going to be her father. The word father moved through Marcus visibly. She watched it travel across his face and settle somewhere that looked less like the man who had walked into this waiting room asking what she did, and more like the man she had occasionally glimpsed underneath that man, uncertain and younger than he allowed himself to appear. I want to be, he said, her father. I want to do that right. Then do it right, Vivian said. Not for me. Not for your family's image. Not to balance out what happened today. Do it because she's going to be a person who will eventually know exactly what kind of effort you made. She left him at the window. Robert was waiting near the elevator. Patricia Norris had stepped away to make a call. Graham Holt was speaking quietly to Amanda. The waiting room had filled again with ordinary people carrying ordinary worries, the whole machinery of a hospital afternoon resuming around the morning's events the way water closes over a stone. Ready, Robert said. Almost, Vivian said. She walked to the reception desk. Amanda looked up with the eyes of someone who had witnessed more than her job description covered today. Vivian placed her hand briefly on the counter. Thank you, she said to Amanda, for calling facilities when Dr. Osei asked. You didn't have to do it when Graham hesitated. You did it anyway. Amanda blinked. I know, Vivian said. That's why I'm saying it. She turned to Dr. Osei, who had been gathering his things near the corridor door. He looked up. My mother was your patient, Vivian said. A long time ago. Dr. Osei was still for a moment. She was. She used to say you were the only doctor who talked to her like she was a full person. She was always a full person, he said simply. As are you. Vivian held his gaze for a moment. Some things did not require more words than that. At the elevator, Robert pressed the button, and they waited in a silence that was not uncomfortable. The afternoon had cost something. She could feel it in her back, in her shoulders, in the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical effort but from the sustained work of refusing to become smaller under pressure. She was tired in a way that was also, underneath, something like relief. The relief of a person who has finally stopped bracing for a blow and discovered that they can withstand the thing they feared. Dad, she said. The stake in Hartwell Medical Group. He looked at the elevator doors. When did you finalize it, she said. A pause. 6 weeks ago. Before you knew I'd be here today. Long before. She considered this. But you knew I was referred here. I knew. She looked at him. And you didn't tell me. You asked me not to follow you into rooms. I asked you not to make my life part of your portfolio. They're different things, he said quietly. I've been trying to learn the difference. The elevator arrived. They stepped in. The doors closed, and for a moment it was just the two of them, and the hum of the cable, and the city falling away beneath them. I'm not angry, Vivian said. You can be, he said. I know. She looked at the numbers descending. I'm not. You didn't send Courtney. You didn't make Marcus order coffee downstairs. You didn't create a hospital administration that reaches for consent forms before ice packs. She paused. You just made sure that when I signed my name, it meant something in this building. Your name always meant something, he said. You're the one who taught it to mean what it means now. The lobby opened around them, bright and warm, with the ordinary noise of a hospital afternoon, gurneys and conversations, and a child near the information desk asking how much longer. Vivian walked through it without hurrying. She was not performing calm. She was calm, the specific calm of a woman who has spent a day proving something to herself and found the proof satisfactory. Outside, the November light was doing its last good work on Michigan Avenue, catching the lake at an angle that made the water look almost warm. Vivian stood on the top step and breathed the cold air and felt her daughter move inside her. One firm and certain push against the left side, as if to say, I'm still here. Keep going. She pressed her hand there and said, quietly enough for only herself, I know. Me too. Robert came to stand beside her. He did not offer his arm immediately. He waited until she reached for it, and when she did, he covered her hand with his the way he had when she was small, and the world was large, and she had not yet learned to be afraid of either. Marcus came through the lobby doors a few minutes later. He stopped at the top of the steps, not beside them, not intruding, just present in the way he was trying to learn to be present, at the right distance, without agenda. She pushed, Vivian said, without turning around. He came forward one step. Yeah, she's been doing it all day. Vivian looked out at the lake. She's going to be exhausting. Marcus stood beside her, not close, but no longer carefully far. She gets that from you. It was the truest thing he had said to her in months. She did not reward him for it, but she did not dismiss it either. She let it be what it was, a beginning, small and unguaranteed, the first honest brick of something that might eventually become a structure she could trust. They stood there for a moment, the three of them, for if you counted the daughter, who was already announcing herself, in the cold, clean air above Michigan Avenue while the city moved around them with its magnificent indifference to individual grief and individual courage alike. Vivian thought about the waiting room, about the ultrasound on the floor, about the word unstable, deployed like a diagnosis by a woman who needed her diminished, about Marcus asking what did you do, about the consent form offered like a trap dressed as a courtesy, about Graham Holt's face when he read her full name and understood that the woman he had been trying to manage had a name that managed rooms on its own. She thought about all the mornings she had woken up and chosen to be smaller than she was because being smaller felt safer. Because being seen meant being evaluated, and being evaluated meant being found lacking, and being found lacking meant losing the things she had organized her life around. She had organized her life around the wrong things. She understood that now not as accusation but as information, something to carry forward instead of carry as weight. She opened the folder and looked at the sonogram image one more time. Her daughter's profile. One hand near her face. Eyes closed. Already private. Already her own. Her name is going to be Eleanor, Marcus said carefully, clearly expecting a reaction. Vivian looked at him. I know, he said quickly. It was my mother's idea, and I agreed before I understood what my agreeing meant. I'm withdrawing that. He paused. I just wanted you to know I'm withdrawing it. Vivian looked back at the image. Her name is going to be June, she said. After my mother. Robert made a sound beside her that was not quite a word, and did not need to be. Marcus nodded.
June, he said.
That's a good name.
It was.
It was a name that meant warmth after a long cold, arrival after waiting, the specific gentleness of a world that has finally decided to open. It was a name Vivian had chosen alone, at 2 a.m, 3 weeks ago, in the quiet of her apartment with the city asleep outside and her daughter awake inside, and she had known immediately and completely that it was right. Some things you know alone first. Then you carry them into the world. She closed the folder. She looked at Michigan Avenue, at the lake beyond it, at the sky going amber and gray above the water, at Chicago doing what Chicago did, enduring, pressing forward, magnificent in its refusal to be anything other than exactly what it was. Then Vivian Grace Whitmore Calloway walked down the steps, not quickly, not triumphantly, Not in the way of someone who has won a war, but in the way of someone who has decided to stop losing one. And the city received her the way cities receive women who have finally learned to take up the space they were always owed. Behind her, Robert followed. Beside her, eventually Marcus. And ahead of her, June. Not yet arrived, already enough.